Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little less academic and a lot more herbal. A trip through the foggy, fragrant world of medieval intoxication. You're standing in a damp stone cottage, watching your neighbor Edith grind mysterious roots while humming what sounds suspiciously like a death chant. The air thick with smoke from herbs you can't pronounce, and honestly, you probably won't survive what she's brewing if you're foolish enough to drink it. But here's the thing. In medieval Europe, getting weird with plants wasn't just weekend entertainment, it was Tuesday. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through muddy streets where the local entertainment involves watching a knight attempt literacy or wondering how long your neighbor can keep dancing before collapsing from ergot poisoning. There's no electricity humming in the background, no coffee to sharpen your morning fog, no antidepressants to smooth the rough edges of futile despair. When someone whispers about a mushroom that makes you forget the crushing weight of serfdom for a few precious hours, you listen, you chew, you hope. The medieval world pulses with botanical secrets hidden in monastery gardens and wise women's pouches. You discover that getting high wasn't called getting high. There were no stoner duos giggling behind haystacks. Instead, people spoke in hushed tones about visionary states, divine inspiration, and pain relief. Sometimes they just said uh-oh when the dosage went sideways. You watch monks cultivating herbs with the same devotion they reserve for copying scriptures. Physicians prescribe roots that blur the line between healing and hallucinating. Witches, depending on who's asking, apply mysterious ointments that make people believe they're soaring naked through moonlit skies with Satan's catering team. Even the bread you eat carries risks, sometimes harboring fungal hitchhikers that turn your morning meal into an unplanned psychedelic adventure. The range of medieval mindbenders stretches far beyond warm ale, though that certainly helps. You encounter roots that literally scream when harvested, flowers that make walls breathe like living things, seeds that unlock prophetic dreams, and ointments that convince perfectly reasonable people they've married trees. Getting altered wasn't necessarily recreational. It was medicinal, spiritual, or simply very poor judgment executed on an empty stomach. Depending on your social rank, your botanical dealer might be a learned barber, a contemplative nun, or a barefoot peasant named Wolf, who claims he learned everything from a remarkably articulate squirrel. In this world, nature serves as the ultimate pharmaceutical company, and she doesn't always provide clear dosage instructions. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the psychological versus spiritual nature of their plant-induced experiences. But what's certain is that altered consciousness was woven into the very fabric of daily life. You breathe in incense during lengthy church services, feeling your head grow mysteriously light. You sip herbal wines that make colors more vivid and Latin prayers more melodious. You rub mysterious salves on aching joints and suddenly understand why birds seem so confident about their navigation skills. You find yourself in a medieval herb garden where henbane grows with deceptive innocence, its dark leaves rustling like whispered warnings. This plant earned its reputation as nature's version of "let's see what this button does," known to botanists as Hyoscyamus niger, and to everyone else as the stuff that made Uncle Bernard think he was a duck for 3 memorable days. You watch as Bernard waddles past your window, quacking at sunrise, completely convinced he belongs in the village pond. The monks record henbane's properties in their carefully illuminated herbals, treating it with the respect reserved for holy relics and sharp knives. You see physicians reaching for it when faced with screaming patients, knowing it can dull agony or create entirely new problems. Peasants mostly hope not to encounter it accidentally, especially after witnessing Bernard's poultry episode. But when your tooth throbs like a demon's drumbeat, you might risk a small dose anyway. You measure carefully. In small amounts, henbane acts as your medieval Ambien. It eases toothaches that feel like miniature sieges helps with insomnia that stretches through endless winter nights and makes childbirth slightly less traumatic. Think of it as take two and try not to scream, medieval edition. But measuring proves tricky when your scale is pinch of this and handful of that, guided by intuition and desperate prayer. In larger doses, Henbane transforms your reality into something Salvador Dali might dream after eating questionable cheese. You experience delirium that makes conversations with furniture seem perfectly reasonable. Visual distortions turn ordinary rooms into funhouse mazes. Extreme thirst makes you convinced you're wandering a desert, even while standing in your own kitchen. Most memorably, you might burst into spontaneous interpretive dance that would impress court jesters and terrify your neighbors. The plant contains scopolamine and hyoscyamine, chemicals that hijack your brain's communication systems. To put it non-scientifically, your medieval mind gets weird fast. You watch walls breathe, experience profound disorientation, suffer cotton mouth that makes speaking feel like chewing wool, and occasionally engage in heartfelt conversations with turnips you're convinced are deceased relatives offering life advice. People consume henbane through smoking, brewing it into teas that taste like regret, or combining it with animal fat to create topical applications. This skin absorption method appeals to anyone who prefers their consciousness rearranged in non-linear fashion. You rub the mixture on your temples and wait for reality to become negotiable. Was henbane legal? Technically, yes. Controlled substances haven't been invented yet, but it remains controversial, especially among church authorities who view altered perception with deep suspicion. Visions should come from saints, they insist, not shrubs. Still, henbane attracts devoted fans among healers, mystics, and people with absolutely nothing left to lose. You discover that henbane even sneaks into beer recipes before being banned in favor of safer additives like hops. Brewers experiment with various plants, sometimes creating ales that do more than quench thirst. They quench your grip on conventional reality. The transition to hops represents medieval Europe's first major harm reduction initiative, though they don't call it that. Historians still argue whether henbane users distinguished between chemical effects and spiritual experiences, but medieval accounts treat both as equally valid forms of altered consciousness. You read testimonies describing divine visions that might have been botanical adventures, and botanical adventures described in unmistakably religious language. Uncle Bernard eventually returns to human consciousness, though he never quite loses his tendency to eye pawns wistfully. His experience becomes village legend, a cautionary tale parents share, while secretly wondering what duck consciousness might reveal about the human condition. In the medieval world, even embarrassing plant encounters carry potential wisdom. You kneel in the moonlit garden, staring at a gnarled root that resembles a tiny, tortured human figure. Mandrake, botanically known as Mandragora officinarum, dangles from your trembling hands like a miniature ancestor, demanding respect. Medieval herbalists whisper that this root screams when uprooted, a sound so lethal it can kill anyone foolish enough to listen. You've just learned why harvesting mandrake requires more strategy than storming a castle. The folklore surrounding mandrake reads like a supernatural thriller written by anxious botanists. You discover that simply hearing the root's death cry supposedly kills instantly, which naturally leads to some creative harvesting techniques. The most famous involves tying the mandrake to a dog, walking far away, and letting the poor animal do the deadly work. You watch from behind a stone wall as Farmer William demonstrates this method, already mourning his loyal hound while hoping to score some prophetic dream material. Medieval texts warn that the mandrake's scream carries such supernatural power that proximity equals death, which raises obvious questions about how anyone originally discovered this. You imagine the first unfortunate herbalist accidentally yanking a root, hearing the alleged shriek, and somehow surviving long enough to spread the terrifying news. The assumption becomes that dogs possess superior supernatural resistance, a theory that ethical committees would definitely question today. Once harvested, and the dog properly mourned, you handle the mandrake like radioactive material wrapped in religious significance. The root can be dried, powdered, steeped in wine, or worn as a protective charm. Some people carry tiny mandrake figures in pouches to ward off evil or promote fertility, because nothing says romance like a mummified root that allegedly witnessed its own traumatic extraction. Used correctly, mandrake serves as medieval anesthesia before surgery, treating insomnia that stretches through endless nights and creating vivid dreams that might contain glimpses of the future. You prepare careful doses in wine, watching the liquid turn an ominous color that suggests either healing or immediate regret. The line between therapeutic and terrifying proves remarkably thin when dealing with screaming plants. Used incorrectly, mandrake causes vomiting that feels like exorcism, unconsciousness that resembles temporary death, and hallucinations so vivid your family might actually stage an exorcism because you've been having theological discussions with your soup. You drift between worlds where turnips offer profound wisdom and ceiling beams sing Latin hymns in perfect harmony. The church predictably disapproves of mandrake, treating anything that induces visions outside official religious channels as witchcraft adjacent. But monks still record detailed mandrake recipes in their herbals, complete with suspiciously specific instructions that suggest extensive hands-on research. You read between the lines of theoretical knowledge that sounds remarkably practical. Mandrake's human-like appearance adds to its mystical reputation. You examine roots that seem to have faces, limbs, and expressions ranging from serene to absolutely terrified. Medieval people believe these resemblances indicate magical potency. The more human-like the root, the more powerful its effects. You wonder if the plants somehow absorb human essence from the soil, creating botanical mirrors of human consciousness. The root's association with fertility and love magic makes it valuable beyond its medicinal uses. You watch couples seek mandrake for wedding preparations, hoping its power will ensure happy marriages and healthy children. The plant becomes a medieval multivitamin with supernatural benefits, assuming you survive the harvesting process. Historians still argue whether mandrake actually produces the dramatic effects described in medieval sources, or whether its fearsome reputation created placebo responses powerful enough to rival the plant's actual chemistry. Either way, you handle each root with the reverence due to something that might unlock prophecy, or simply convince you that your breakfast is plotting revenge. You stand before your reflection in a polished bronze mirror, holding a small vial of Belladonna extract, while contemplating beauty standards that literally require poisoning yourself. The name means beautiful lady in Italian, earned because medieval noblewomen deliberately dripped this deadly nightshade juice into their eyes to achieve the wide-eyed, mysterious look that supposedly drove men wild. You're about to discover why cosmetics and toxicology were once the same dangerous hobby. The beauty ritual begins with careful preparation. A few drops of belladonna extract on a silver spoon, blessed by whatever saints protect foolish vanity. You tilt your head back and let the poison fall into your eyes, feeling immediate burning that suggests this might be a terrible idea. Within minutes, your pupils dilate to enormous black pools that make you look perpetually surprised, mysteriously saintly, or possibly possessed by something that appreciates dramatic irony. The side effects arrive like uninvited guests at a wedding. Your vision blurs until reading becomes impossible. Light sensitivity makes sunshine feel like divine punishment, and depth perception abandons you entirely. You navigate familiar rooms by memory, hoping not to walk into walls while looking mystically beautiful. The medieval beauty motto apparently reads, "Suffer elegantly or don't suffer at all." Beyond cosmetics, belladonna serves darker purposes in the medieval pharmaceutical arsenal. You watch physicians use it as a painkiller when patients scream loudly enough to wake the dead, a sleep aid for insomniacs driven mad by endless winter nights, and occasionally as a truth serum that produces confessions like, "The ceiling is definitely plotting against me, and I've been having philosophical discussions with that suspicious-looking bread." The plant contains atropine and scopolamine, chemicals that mess with your nervous system in ways ranging from mildly trippy to, why is the wallpaper conducting a choir of invisible angels? You experience hallucinations that transform ordinary rooms into supernatural theaters, where furniture performs mysterious rituals and walls breathe with suspicious intentionality. Belladonna becomes a common ingredient in flying ointments, mysterious potions, and questionable medical procedures throughout medieval Europe. Need to numb a patient before sawing off a limb? Belladonna. Want to simulate death-like sleep for theatrical or deeply suspicious purposes? Belladonna. Hoping to accidentally meet saints and possibly demons in your dreams? You already know the answer. Despite its obvious toxicity, Belladonna remains part of the medieval medical toolkit because desperate times call for desperate plants. You watch physicians use it carefully during plague-free weeks and recklessly when the Black Death returns for encore performances. It appears in herbals, recipes, and love charms across Europe, proving that romance and risk have always been uncomfortable bedfellows. The transition from cosmetic to hallucinogenic proves seamlessly medieval. You start by trying to look attractive and end up believing your mirror reflection is offering unsolicited life advice. Women apply belladonna for beauty and accidentally achieve mystical experiences that nuns would envy. The line between vanity and vision becomes as blurred as your dilated sight. Court ladies develop elaborate techniques for managing belladonna's effects during social events. You learn to smile mysteriously while completely unable to see who you're talking to, nod wisely at conversations you can't follow, and gracefully excuse yourself before admitting you've been agreeing with a potted plant for the past 10 minutes. Historians still argue whether medieval women fully understood belladonna's hallucinogenic properties, or simply accepted mysterious visions as part of achieving ethereal beauty. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between informed risk-taking and beauty standards, so demanding that temporary insanity seems like a reasonable price for enlarged pupils. The legacy continues in modern expressions like doe-eyed and wide-eyed wonder, though contemporary beauty enthusiasts rely on less toxic methods to achieve the same mysteriously enlarged pupil look that once required literal poison and considerable faith in medieval ophthalmology. You stand on the deck of a Bronze Age galley, salt spray stinging your face as you realize that controlling these endless blue highways meant controlling the fate of entire civilizations. The ancient Mediterranean isn't just water, it's the beating heart of empire, carrying grain that feeds cities, gold that finances armies, messages that spark wars, and soldiers who decide whether kingdoms rise or crumble into forgotten ruins. The sea transforms from obstacle into opportunity for those bold enough to master its moods. You watch Phoenician merchants navigate by stars, while Egyptian grain ships lumber toward hungry populations. Unlike land warfare, where mountains and rivers dictate strategy, naval combat flows with tides, winds, and the terrifying possibility that your entire army might simply disappear beneath the waves if someone miscalculates the weather. For seafaring empires like Athens, Carthage, and Egypt, naval supremacy becomes existential necessity rather than military luxury. You understand that cities without fleets face isolation, starvation, and siege, while those commanding the waves can blockade enemies, protect merchant convoys, and land forces deep behind enemy lines like ancient amphibious nightmares. The Mediterranean earns its name as the Middle Sea by connecting 3 continents and countless cultures in one vast liquid marketplace. You trace trade routes that carry everything from Phoenician purple dye to Roman wine, each cargo ship protected by warships that turn commerce into warfare and warfare into prosperity. Dominating this inland ocean means controlling the pulse of everything from grain shipments to philosophical manuscripts. Ancient powers pour resources into naval infrastructure with the desperation of nations whose survival depends on floating wood. You explore harbors that serve as military bases, commercial hubs, and diplomatic centers, where foreign ambassadors negotiate while counting the warships anchored nearby. Shipyards become temples of engineering, where craftsmen build floating fortresses that project power across horizons. Athens transforms itself from landlocked city-state into maritime superpower through pure silver-funded ambition. You witness Themistocles convincing fellow citizens to invest their newfound wealth in triremes rather than personal luxuries, a decision that saves Athens from Persian invasion and creates an empire that rules through ore power and bronze rams. The victory at Salamis in 480 BCE demonstrates how narrow straits can become graveyards for even the mightiest fleets. You watch Athenian triremes trap and annihilate Persian warships in confined waters where superior numbers become tactical disadvantages. That triumph doesn't save Athens. It positions the city as protector and eventual ruler of the Aegean under the Delian League. Carthage emerges as a naval titan through merchant routes that grow into military dominance. You observe their circular harbor system, producing warships with assembly line efficiency that wouldn't be matched until modern industrial warfare. Carthaginian power flows from trade routes protected by fleets that turn piracy into suicide and rival navies into cautionary tales. Naval blockades become weapons of mass starvation, slowly strangling cities until populations surrender or starve. You experience the psychological warfare of watching enemy ships control your food supply while your own fleet lies broken on distant shores. Control of sea lanes determines whether armies eat or flee, whether cities prosper or wither. The transition from regional naval powers to Mediterranean-spanning empires happens through mastery of logistics, tactics, and the terrible mathematics of wooden ships loaded with bronze-armed men who understand that victory means sailing home, while defeat means feeding the fish. Historians still argue whether naval technology drove imperial expansion or imperial ambition drove naval innovation. But you see how fleets and empires grow together like symbiotic organisms that either thrive in salt water or die on dry land together. You slide down the narrow wooden ladder into the belly of an Athenian trireme, joining 170 rowers packed like synchronized sardines in humanity's first precision naval weapon. The ship stretches 120 feet long, but only 18 feet wide, creating a sleek bronze-tipped missile powered by sweat, rhythm, and the desperate hope that your ram hits their hull before theirs hits yours. The trireme's name comes from its revolutionary three-tiered rowing system. You're seated on one of three levels, where men pull oars in perfect unison while praying to Poseidon and trying not to think about drowning. These aren't random peasants grabbed from fishing boats. Each rower is a trained citizen sailor who knows exactly when to stroke, when to rest, and when to brace for the bone-jarring impact of ramming an enemy vessel. You feel the ship accelerate as all 170 oars bite water simultaneously, propelling your bronze battering ram towards speeds of 9 knots, fast enough to punch through enemy hulls like divine judgment delivered at sea level. The narrow design that makes your quarters cramped also creates the hydrodynamic perfection that transforms rowers into a living engine of maritime destruction. The bronze-sheathed ram gleaming at your bow represents the trireme's primary weapon, a reinforced oak prow designed to smash enemy hulls below the waterline. You watch experienced captains practice the Dikeplaus maneuver, threading through enemy lines before pivoting to strike exposed flanks. Hit correctly, and enemy ships sink in minutes. Hit incorrectly, and your own vessel becomes embedded in theirs like an awkward bronze embrace of mutual destruction. Above deck, 10 to 20 heavily armed hoplites serve as marines, ready to board enemy vessels or defend against boarding attempts. You hear their bronze armor clanking as they prepare spears and shields, knowing that if ramming fails, the sea battle transforms into bloody close-quarters combat on slippery decks, where footing means the difference between victory and feeding the fish. The trireme proves that engineering can revolutionize warfare when combined with trained crews and tactical innovation. You're part of Athens' democratic navy, where even the poorest citizens serve as essential rowers, creating strange maritime equality, where aristocrats and commoners pull oars side by side while contemplating death by drowning or enemy bronze. Funded by the Theorica Public Naval Fund, Athens builds and maintains hundreds of these floating weapons, creating the world's first systematically organized naval force. You understand that trireme fleets require massive infrastructure, shipyards for construction, harbors for maintenance, and constant training to keep crews synchronized enough to function as living weapons systems. The ship's low draft allows operations close to shore for coastal raids and beach landings, transforming triremes into amphibious assault vehicles that can strike anywhere the sea touches land. You practice beach landings where rowers become instant infantry, dragging ships onto sand before charging inland with the same coordination used for naval combat. Skilled captains develop signature moves like the periplus, circling enemy formations to attack from behind, turning naval combat into three-dimensional chess played at ramming speed. You learn to read wind patterns, current flows, and enemy formations while maintaining the split-second timing that separates successful ramming from catastrophic collision. The psychological impact of 170 synchronized rowers propelling a bronze ram toward your ship cannot be understated. You watch enemy crews panic as Athenian triremes approach in perfect formation, bronze rams glinting like shark teeth, while trained voices call the stroke rhythm that sounds like death approaching at 9 knots. Historians still argue whether trireme tactics influenced later naval warfare or remained uniquely suited to Mediterranean conditions, but you feel the power of coordination transformed into kinetic energy as bronze meets wood and empires rise or fall based on whose rowers maintain rhythm longest under pressure. You grip the trireme's rail as two enemy fleets converge, transforming the placid Mediterranean into a deadly chessboard where bronze rams and boarding planks determine which civilization continues existing. Naval combat isn't about blasting cannons from safe distances. It's high-speed chess played with wooden missiles, where one perfect maneuver sends enemy ships to the bottom, while one mistake makes you fish food. The primary goal burns simple and terrifying. Disable or sink the enemy before they do the same to you. You watch captains position their bronze-tipped rams like aquatic lances, seeking that perfect angle where momentum meets enemy hull below the waterline. A well-placed ram punch can send vessels to the seabed in minutes, but timing, angle, and coordination matter more than raw courage. Ramming requires split-second precision that would challenge modern pilots. You observe the Deekplaus in action, ships darting through enemy formations like bronze needles threading deadly fabric, then pivoting to strike exposed flanks. Too sharp an approach bounces harmlessly off enemy hulls. Too direct embeds your ship in theirs, leaving both crews locked in floating death traps while other vessels circle like sharks. The periplus maneuver turns naval combat into three-dimensional warfare. You sail in formations that suddenly circle enemy fleets, attacking from unexpected angles, while enemy captains frantically try to reposition ships that respond like floating fortresses with the turning radius of drunk elephants. Victory belongs to whoever maintains formation while disrupting enemy coordination. Sometimes ramming fails spectacularly, leaving ships locked together like fighting stags whose antlers have become permanently tangled. That's when Plan B emerges, boarding actions that transform sea battles into floating street fights. You watch Marines leap across narrow gaps between vessels, turning organized naval warfare into chaotic melees where bronze meets bronze on decks slick with salt water and blood. Boarding becomes the Roman specialty when they realize they can't outsail experienced Carthaginian crews. You witness the Corvus in action, a boarding plank with a metal spike that hooks onto enemy ships, creating instant bridges for Roman infantry to charge across. What Romans lack in seamanship, they compensate through sheer violence and tactical innovation that turns sea battles into land battles fought on unstable platforms. Fire ships represent naval warfare's nuclear option. Vessels loaded with pitch, tar, sulfur, and desperate hope, then set ablaze before drifting toward tightly packed enemy formations. You feel primal terror watching flaming ships approach your fleet like floating demons, spreading panic faster than actual flames. Wind shifts can turn fire ships into friendly fire disasters, making this tactic as dangerous to attackers as defenders. Archers and slingers add chaos from upper decks, picking off anyone showing too much helmet, while Marines prepare for close combat. You duck projectiles while trying to maintain rowing rhythm, understanding that naval battles involve simultaneous coordination and improvisation as situations change faster than orders can be shouted. The psychological warfare proves as important as actual ramming. You hear enemy crews singing war songs to maintain morale, while your own captain shouts encouragement mixed with tactical commands. Broken formations create panic that spreads through fleets like contagious terror, turning organized attacks into every ship for itself retreats. Greek fire later adds chemical warfare to naval arsenals, mysterious substances that burn on water and can't be extinguished by conventional methods. You witness Byzantine fleets using liquid fire that transforms enemy ships into floating pyres, adding supernatural dread to already terrifying naval combat. Naval victories require perfect storms of wind, weather, crew training, and tactical brilliance. You understand that sea battles can eliminate entire fleets in single afternoons, making naval commanders simultaneously the most powerful and most vulnerable military leaders in the ancient world. Historians still argue whether ancient naval tactics influenced modern warfare or remained uniquely suited to oar-powered combat. But you experience how control of the seas meant control of empire, trade, and survival itself. You stand in a Roman shipyard, watching engineers frantically examine a captured Carthaginian quinquereme like archaeologists studying alien technology. Rome, master of roads and legions, finds itself desperately outclassed on water by enemies who've been building ships since before Romulus allegedly suckled wolves. What happens next transforms landlocked Romans into naval innovators through pure stubbornness and reverse engineering genius. The First Punic War catches Rome embarrassingly unprepared for naval warfare. You witness Romans discovering that their legendary infantry discipline means nothing when Carthaginian crews execute maneuvers perfected over centuries of Mediterranean dominance. Carthaginian sailors navigate by star knowledge passed down through generations, while Romans still get seasick looking at harbor water. According to legend, Romans capture a stranded Carthaginian quinquereme and treat it like a blueprint from the gods. You watch shipwrights crawl over every plank, measuring dimensions, copying construction techniques, and probably sacrificing to Neptune for engineering inspiration. Within months, Roman shipyards mass-produce their own fleet through state-level organization that would impress modern assembly lines. The Romans know they can't outsail Carthaginian masters, so they change the game entirely. You observe the corvus being fitted to Roman ships, a boarding bridge with a metal spike that can hook onto enemy vessels. This device transforms sea battles into infantry brawls, Rome's specialty, turning naval combat into something Roman soldiers actually understand: organized violence on unstable platforms. The corvus proves devastatingly effective in early naval encounters. You watch Roman marines charge across boarding planks onto Carthaginian decks, transforming experienced sailors into confused infantry facing opponents trained since childhood for close combat. What Carthaginians gained through seamanship, Romans counter through tactical innovation and superior armor. At battles like Mylae and Cape Ecnomus, Rome's inexperienced sailors defeat veteran Carthaginian crews through sheer aggression and the corvus's effectiveness. You witness relatively green Roman fleets using boarding tactics to neutralize centuries of Carthaginian naval superiority, proving that innovation can overcome experience when applied with sufficient violence. The corvus eventually gets abandoned because it makes ships dangerously top-heavy in rough weather. You watch Roman vessels listing precariously as the boarding bridge's weight shifts with each wave, creating situations where tactical advantages become navigational disasters. But by then, the corvus has already achieved its purpose, turning the tide of naval warfare in Rome's favor. By the Second Punic War, Roman naval infrastructure matures beyond desperate improvisation. You observe fleets patrolling the western Mediterranean, protecting supply lines to Iberia and Africa, while disrupting Hannibal's ability to receive reinforcements from Carthage. Naval blockades and amphibious landings become standard Roman tactics, turning the sea from weakness into weapon. Under the Empire, Roman control expands through systematic naval organization. The classis Mesanensis and classis Ravenitensis serve as primary imperial fleets, stationed strategically to protect trade routes, suppress piracy, and transport troops across Mare Nostrum, our sea, as Romans modestly call the Mediterranean. Roman naval success demonstrates adaptation triumphing over tradition. You understand that Rome's transformation from naval novice to maritime master happens through recognizing limitations, stealing good ideas, and applying Roman organizational genius to borrowed technology. The corvus represents Roman problem-solving at its finest. If you can't beat them, change the rules. The legacy extends beyond military victory into imperial infrastructure. You see how Roman naval dominance enables the economic and cultural networks that bind the empire together, making the Mediterranean a Roman lake where trade, communication, and control flow along protected sea routes. Historians still argue whether Roman naval innovations influenced later maritime warfare or remained uniquely suited to ancient combat conditions. But you witness how Rome used the sea as a tool to be mastered rather than an environment to be feared, turning maritime weakness into imperial strength through engineering, tactics, and trademark Roman stubbornness. You peer into the swirling mists of legend surrounding baby Cyrus, where history and mythology dance together like lovers, sharing secrets in the shadows of ancient Persia. King Astyages of Media tosses fitfully in his royal bed, haunted by dreams that his daughter's unborn child will overthrow him. The court interpreters nod gravely. Yes, this baby will indeed threaten your throne. You watch destiny weaving itself through royal paranoia and family betrayal. Astyages arranges his daughter Mandane's marriage to Cambyses the Elder, a Persian noble carefully chosen for his political insignificance. You observe the Median king's calculating mind at work. Surely a child born to minor Persian nobility poses no real threat to his empire. But dreams have a way of mocking human attempts to outmaneuver fate, and baby Cyrus enters the world carrying prophecies like invisible crowns. The nightmares intensify after Cyrus's birth, driving Astyages to order the unthinkable. You witness him summoning Harpagus, his most trusted servant, with instructions that make both men's souls shrivel. Kill the infant before destiny can unfold. Harpagus accepts the terrible task with the heavy heart of a man who understands that refusing royal commands means joining the baby in whatever afterlife awaits. But Harpagus finds himself unable to murder an innocent child, even one supposedly destined for regicide. You follow him as he delegates this gruesome responsibility to a shepherd named Mithridates, hoping that distance will somehow diminish his complicity in infanticide. The shepherd receives the baby with instructions that sound like moral riddles designed to torment consciences. Instead of abandoning Cyrus to exposure and wild animals, Mithridates makes a decision that reshapes the ancient world. You watch him raise the prophesied prince as his own son, hiding royal blood beneath shepherd's wool, while teaching Cyrus to navigate mountain paths and understand common people's struggles. The boy destined to rule empires learns leadership by herding sheep and mediating children's disputes. Cyrus grows with charisma that transcends social class, displaying leadership qualities that make other children naturally defer to his judgment. You observe him organizing elaborate games, where he consistently emerges as the chosen leader, commanding respect through fairness and natural authority, rather than inherited position. Even disguised as a shepherd's son, royalty bleeds through his actions. The truth eventually unravels when Cyrus's noble bearing attracts court attention. You witness the investigation that reveals his true identity, watching Astyages confront the reality that his murderous dreams have been thwarted by a shepherd's conscience. Surprisingly, the Median king spares Cyrus, perhaps seeing no threat in a boy raised among sheep, perhaps haunted by guilt over his original intentions. Harpagus faces different consequences for his disobedience. You shudder as Astyages orchestrates revenge more twisted than infanticide, killing Harpagus's own son and serving him as dinner, revealing the gruesome truth only after the father has unknowingly consumed his child's flesh. The betrayal plants seeds of vengeance that will bloom into rebellion. Cyrus returns to his biological father Cambyses in Persia, officially recognized as royal heir, but carrying within him experiences that separate him from typical princes. You understand that his time among shepherds and nobles alike provides unique insight into both power's responsibilities and people's needs. Wisdom that will define his revolutionary approach to kingship. The mythical elements of Cyrus's origin story reflect the awe that surrounded him even in ancient times. You sense how his contemporaries struggled to explain greatness that seemed to transcend normal human limitations, weaving supernatural explanations around accomplishments that defied conventional understanding of leadership and conquest. Historians still argue whether Herodotus's account contains factual elements or represents pure legendary construction, but you recognize how the story captures essential truths about Cyrus's character, his ability to inspire loyalty across social boundaries, and his understanding of power as service rather than domination. You stand in the Persian highlands, watching young Prince Cyrus transform from shepherd-raised royal into the calculating leader who will shatter the Median yoke forever. The mid-6th century BCE finds Persia still kneeling to King Astyages. But beneath the surface of vassalage, rebellion simmers like water approaching boil. Cyrus has grown into a man who understands both the weight of crowns and the price of freedom. The catalyst arrives through Betrayal's twisted justice. You witness Harpagus, the man forced to devour his own son as punishment for sparing baby Cyrus, secretly contacting his former victim with messages that drip vengeance disguised as political opportunity. The general who once saved Cyrus's life now seeks salvation through Persian independence, offering inside knowledge of Median military weaknesses and promising support from within enemy ranks. Around 553 BCE, Cyrus declares what sounds like diplomatic independence, but feels like war drums echoing through mountain valleys. You watch Persia officially reject Median overlordship, transforming from subordinate kingdom into sovereign nation through pure audacity backed by growing military confidence. The announcement reverberates across the ancient Near East like a challenge thrown at the feet of established order. What follows isn't a single decisive battle, but 3 years of grinding campaigns that test both Persian resolve and Median resilience. You march with Cyrus's forces as they push deeper into Median territory, drawing support from disaffected nobles who've grown tired of Astyages' increasingly erratic rule. Each victory attracts new allies, while each setback forces Persian determination to crystallize into unbreakable steel. Cyrus's reputation grows not just for military competence, but for the restraint that separates conquerors from liberators. You observe him sparing surrendered enemies' lives, preserving local customs, and incorporating former opponents into his expanding administration. This policy of inclusion becomes Cyrus's signature approach, winning hearts and minds while smashing resistance through strategic brilliance rather than savage brutality. The Median court crumbles from within as loyalty erodes under pressure from Persian victories and Astyages' paranoid leadership. You witness nobles questioning their allegiance to a king whose dreams of infanticide have transformed into waking nightmares of losing everything to the baby he failed to kill. Internal betrayal weakens Median resistance more effectively than external pressure. When the final confrontation arrives around 550 BCE, it unfolds as much through treachery as tactics. You watch Astyages' own army abandon him on the battlefield, leaving the once mighty Median king to face capture by the shepherd-raised prince whose destiny he tried to prevent. The irony burns bitter, the grandfather defeated by the grandson he attempted to murder decades earlier. Cyrus enters Ecbatana, the Median capital, not as a barbarian destroyer but as a new kind of ruler who treats conquest as opportunity for unity rather than exploitation. You observe him respecting Median traditions, preserving administrative structures, and incorporating Median nobles into his government. This inclusive approach transforms former enemies into loyal administrators of Persian expansion. The victory over Media doesn't just liberate Persia from vassalage, it creates the foundation of the Persian Empire by unifying the Iranian plateau under single leadership. You understand that Cyrus has inherited not just Median territory, but also their imperial infrastructure, transforming a regional rebellion into the embryonic stages of world conquest. The Median defeat establishes patterns that will define Cyrus's approach to empire building. Respect for local customs, inclusion of former enemies, preservation of existing institutions, and leadership through service rather than domination. You see how these policies create stability in conquered territories while reducing the constant rebellions that plague other ancient empires. Historians still argue whether Cyrus's inclusive policies reflected genuine tolerance or calculated pragmatism, but you witness how his treatment of defeated Medes creates loyal subjects rather than resentful enemies, establishing the foundation for an empire that will stretch from India to Greece through cooperation rather than constant suppression. You stand beside King Croesus of Lydia as he contemplates the most expensive mistake in ancient history, watching his legendary wealth evaporate like morning dew before Persian determination. Croesus isn't just rich, he's so fabulously wealthy that his name becomes synonymous with impossible prosperity, ruling from Sardis where gold flows like water and luxury defines daily existence. You're about to witness how infinite riches prove worthless against superior strategy and winter warfare. Fresh from crushing the Medes, Cyrus turns his calculating gaze westward toward Lydia, where Croesus has been watching Persian expansion with growing alarm. You observe the Lydian king forming defensive alliances with Egypt and Babylon, while consulting the oracle at Delphi, seeking divine guidance about whether to attack this upstart Persian prince before he becomes unstoppable. The oracle delivers prophecy wrapped in deadly ambiguity. The famous oracle tells Croesus that crossing the river to attack Persia will destroy a great empire, encouraging words that sound like guaranteed victory, until you understand how fate enjoys cruel wordplay. You watch Croesus interpret divine encouragement where prudent rulers might detect warning. Confidence overriding caution as golden wealth blinds him to Persian military innovations and Cyrus's tactical brilliance. The two forces clash near the Halys River in 547 BCE, where Lydian cavalry meets Persian infantry in combat that reveals how traditional advantages can evaporate against unconventional tactics. You witness a fiercely contested battle that ends inconclusively, with Croesus withdrawing to Sardis, believing the campaign season finished, and planning to regroup with allied reinforcements during spring's return. But Cyrus executes something unprecedented in ancient warfare: winter pursuit that transforms tactical withdrawal into strategic disaster. You march with Persian forces through harsh weather conditions that should make campaigning impossible, watching Cyrus maintain momentum when conventional wisdom demands waiting for favorable seasons. The decision demonstrates Persian adaptability and Cyrus's willingness to rewrite military tradition. The siege of Sardis showcases Persian engineering and Lydian desperation in equal measure. You observe Cyrus employing tactical surprises that neutralize Lydian advantages, including the famous use of camels to terrify Lydian cavalry horses. The strategy proves that psychological warfare can be as devastating as bronze weapons when applied with sufficient creativity and perfect timing. According to Herodotus, Croesus deploys his strongest asset, cavalry that has dominated regional warfare for generations, only to watch horses panic at the unfamiliar sight and smell of Persian camels. You witness centuries of military tradition crumble as Lydian horsemen lose control of their mounts, transforming elite cavalry into confused infantry, facing an enemy that has neutralized their primary advantage through pure innovation. Within weeks, the supposedly impregnable fortress of Sardis falls to Persian siege tactics that combine patience with audacity. You watch Croesus face capture alive, becoming a living symbol of how quickly fortune reverses when preparation meets opportunity. The richest man in the ancient world discovers that wealth without wisdom creates vulnerability rather than security. The aftermath reveals Cyrus's revolutionary approach to conquered rulers. Instead of executing Croesus according to ancient custom, you witness Cyrus sparing his life and reportedly making him an advisor. The story goes that as Croesus faced execution by burning, he cried out Solon's name, the Greek philosopher who warned against counting anyone fortunate until knowing how their story ends. Cyrus supposedly orders the fire extinguished after hearing this tale, moved by wisdom that transcends cultural boundaries. You understand that whether historical fact or legendary embellishment, this narrative reflects Cyrus's known policy of clemency that transforms enemies into allies rather than martyrs into symbols of resistance. The conquest of Lydia provides Cyrus with immense treasury resources and control over Greek city-states along the Ionian coast. You observe how Lydian gold finances further Persian expansion, while Ionian Greeks become reluctant subjects of an empire that will eventually threaten the Greek mainland itself. Historians still argue whether Cyrus's mercy toward Croesus represents calculated policy or genuine philosophical development, but you witness how Persian treatment of defeated enemies creates patterns of inclusion that distinguish Cyrus's empire from purely exploitative conquest systems. You walk through the legendary gates of Babylon without hearing a single war cry, witnessing the most anticlimactic conquest in ancient history as Cyrus enters the world's greatest city, not as a destroyer, but as a divinely appointed liberator. The massive double walls that have protected Babylon for centuries stand useless against an enemy who wins through politics rather than siege engines, proving that sometimes the mightiest fortresses fall to ideas rather than armies. By the late 540s BCE, Babylon teeters under the unpopular rule of Nabonidus, a king whose religious policies have alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk, the city's chief deity. You observe growing discontent as Nabonidus spends years away from Babylon, leaving the empire in his son Belshazzar's hands, while pursuing archaeological interests and religious reforms that infuriate traditional power structures. Internal rot weakens the city more effectively than external pressure. Cyrus recognizes opportunity in Babylonian political dysfunction, launching a campaign that combines military pressure with sophisticated propaganda warfare. You watch Persian forces defeat Babylonian troops at Opis on the Tigris, but the real victory happens through messages promising liberation from Nabonidus's misrule. Cyrus presents himself as Marduk's chosen instrument for restoring proper religious order and political justice. The psychological warfare proves devastatingly effective, as Babylonians begin viewing Persian invasion as divine intervention rather than foreign conquest. You witness how Cyrus's promises to respect local temples, restore proper religious ceremonies, and govern according to traditional customs transform potential resistance into eager cooperation. The approaching Persian army starts looking like salvation rather than subjugation. When Cyrus's forces reach Babylon itself, the city's gates open without siege or slaughter. You experience the surreal moment when history's most powerful fortress welcomes its conqueror like a returning hero, proving that political legitimacy can accomplish what military force cannot. The bloodless conquest becomes a masterpiece of strategic patience combined with perfect timing. Cyrus enters Babylon and immediately begins implementing policies that validate his propaganda promises. You observe him participating in religious ceremonies honoring Marduk, restoring damaged temples, and declaring himself protector of Babylonian traditions rather than their destroyer. His actions demonstrate understanding that lasting conquest requires winning hearts and minds, not just battles and cities. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first charter of human rights, records his revolutionary approach to imperial governance. You read proclamations promising religious freedom, temple restoration, and repatriation of displaced peoples, policies that sound remarkably modern while serving ancient diplomatic purposes. Cyrus positions himself as liberator rather than conqueror, protector rather than exploiter. Among those affected by Cyrus's inclusive policies are the Jews exiled from Jerusalem decades earlier by Babylonian kings. You witness the Persian king issuing edicts allowing them to return home and rebuild their destroyed temple, an act so significant that Hebrew scriptures call him God's anointed, a title otherwise reserved for Israelite royalty. Foreign conquest becomes divine deliverance through enlightened policy. The peaceful annexation of Babylon provides Cyrus with more than territorial expansion. It grants him legitimacy as heir to Mesopotamian imperial traditions dating back millennia. You understand that controlling Babylon means controlling the symbolic heart of Near Eastern civilization, transforming the Persian Empire from regional power into legitimate successor to ancient greatness. Cyrus's treatment of Babylonian institutions establishes patterns that will define Persian imperial administration for centuries. You observe how respect for local customs reduces rebellions, while incorporation of existing bureaucracies provides administrative continuity. The empire grows through absorption rather than destruction, creating stability that pure military conquest cannot achieve. The Babylonian conquest also demonstrates Cyrus's genius for turning enemy weaknesses into strategic advantages. You see how internal Babylonian conflicts become opportunities for Persian intervention. Religious dissatisfaction becomes justification for regime change, and cultural sensitivity becomes the foundation for lasting imperial control. Historians still argue whether Cyrus's inclusive policies reflected genuine tolerance or calculated pragmatism designed to prevent rebellions, but you witness how his approach to Babylon creates the template for governing diverse populations that will enable the Persian Empire to become the largest the ancient world has yet seen. You feel the scorching Nile sun beating down on your freshly shaved scalp, Understanding why ancient Egyptians made the bold choice to remove every strand of hair before adorning themselves with some of the most elaborate wigs the ancient world ever created. In the blistering heat of the Egyptian desert, hair becomes a liability, a trap for sweat, dust, and the countless insects that consider human scalps prime real estate. So you embrace baldness as both practical necessity and spiritual purification. The ritual of head shaving transcends mere comfort, transforming into a symbol of purity that separates civilized Egyptians from hairy barbarians. You watch priests performing their daily ablutions, removing every trace of body hair to maintain ritual cleanliness required for serving the gods. Cleanliness approaches godliness when your spiritual duties involve handling sacred objects and performing ceremonies that connect earth to divine realms. Upon your clean canvas of scalp, you place wigs that serve as elaborate status symbols declaring your position in society's hierarchy. These aren't simple hairpieces. You're wearing artworks crafted from real human hair, imported horsehair, or finely woven plant fibers, depending on your wealth and social standing. The most expensive wigs require teams of skilled craftsmen working for weeks to create layered masterpieces that proclaim their wearer's importance. Wealthy elites commission wigs with multiple layers, intricate braiding, gold beads, and perfumed cones placed strategically at the top. You balance wax-based scents that melt slowly in the sun, covering you in luxury fragrances that announce your approach before you're visible. The melting perfume creates an aromatic cloud that follows you through palace corridors and marketplace negotiations like olfactory punctuation marks. For women, hairstyles intertwine with concepts of femininity, fertility, and divine power that transform appearance into spiritual statement. You arrange your wig with floral decorations, colorful bands, and precious metal clasps that catch sunlight while proclaiming your connection to goddesses like Hathor and Isis. Noble women's wigs become architectural achievements that require engineering knowledge to maintain structural integrity. Priestesses wear their artificial hair in tight, symmetrical rows that echo divine order and cosmic harmony. You understand that religious hairstyles aren't fashion choices, but sacred geometry made manifest in human form, connecting earthly servants to celestial patterns that govern universal balance. Every strand occupies its designated position according to theological principles. Male courtiers sport thick, stylized wigs that reflect their closeness to pharaonic power and divine hierarchy. You display your wig's elaborate construction as evidence of wealth and favor, while navigating court politics, where appearance literally determines access to royal presence. The more impressive your artificial hair, the closer you can approach the god king who rules Egypt. Children wear the distinctive sidelock of youth, a shaved head with one ornate braid dangling beside the ear. You watch young nobles sporting this style that marks them as protected by childhood's innocence while preparing for adult responsibilities. The sidelock gets ceremonially cut during coming-of-age rituals that transform children into citizens through symbolic hair removal. Bold priests present the ultimate contrast to courtly extravagance through complete hair removal that demonstrates spiritual commitment. You observe them maintaining absolutely smooth heads, faces, and bodies to achieve ritual purity required for approaching the gods. Their baldness becomes religious statement more powerful than any artificial adornment. The practice extends beyond death into eternal afterlife preparation. You examine mummies buried with wigs positioned perfectly for their journey into the next world, ensuring that status and beauty carry into eternity. Hair becomes identity that transcends mortality through careful preservation and artificial enhancement. Wig construction reveals sophisticated understanding of materials, engineering, and aesthetics that rivals modern fashion technology. You marvel at ancient techniques for creating natural-looking hairpieces that maintain their shape in desert heat, while remaining comfortable enough for all-day wear during religious ceremonies and administrative duties. Historians still argue whether Egyptian wig culture influenced later civilizations or remained uniquely adapted to Nile Valley conditions, but you experience how artificial hair becomes natural expression of identity, status, and spiritual connection in a society where appearance carries divine significance. You stand in a Norse longhouse, lime washing your hair until it stands stiff and bright like a crown of warrior pride, understanding that Viking culture treats every strand as a declaration of honor worth dying to defend. Your hair isn't just personal grooming, it's a battle standard that announces your courage, clan loyalty, and readiness to fight anyone foolish enough to challenge your dignity through follicular insult. The ritual begins with preparing lime wash from burned bones and ash, creating a caustic paste that transforms ordinary brown or blonde locks into intimidating spikes of bleached aggression. You work the mixture through your hair until it hardens into a mohawk-like crest that makes you look like you've been struck by lightning while screaming war songs. The effect terrifies enemies and bonds you with fellow warriors who understand that hair is honor made visible. For Viking men, long hair styled meticulously demonstrates strength and attention to detail that separates true warriors from pretenders. You braid elaborate patterns that require patience and skill, proving that real men can master both swordwork and haircraft with equal expertise. Top knots and half-shaved heads aren't just stylish, they're intimidating statements that broadcast your readiness for combat and resistance to fear. Viking women display equally symbolic hair arrangements that communicate femininity, high status, and marital availability through complex braiding patterns. You weave ribbons and beads into intricate designs that require hours of work and considerable wealth to maintain properly. Long, well-groomed hair becomes a marker of family prosperity and personal discipline that attracts suitable marriage partners. The legal implications of hair prove surprisingly serious in Viking society. You discover that cutting someone's hair without permission constitutes grave insult punishable by revenge, legal retribution, or full-blown blood feuds that can span generations. Hair represents honor, and to disgrace a warrior by chopping his locks attacks his social standing itself, transforming hairdressing into potential warfare. Wedding ceremonies involve hair symbolism that binds couples through follicular commitment. You watch brides having their hair restyled to indicate marital status, similar to how modern wedding rings announce relationship commitment. Married women often wear their hair wrapped or partially covered, signaling their unavailability while preserving their beauty for their husband's eyes. Archaeological evidence reveals the importance Vikings placed on grooming through burial sites containing combs, hairpins, and styling tools that suggest daily care and pride in appearance were crucial to both sexes. You examine graves where warriors rest with their grooming implements, prepared to maintain their intimidating hairstyles throughout eternity's battles. Norse mythology reinforces hair's cultural significance through divine examples that inspire mortal styling choices. You hear sagas describing Thor's flaming red beard, Loki's shape-shifting transformations that often involve dramatic hair changes, and especially goddess Sif's legendary golden hair, so beautiful that when Loki cut it as a prank, he had to beg dwarves to forge magical replacement strands from actual gold. The connection between hair and identity runs so deep that losing your locks feels like losing your soul. You understand that Viking hair serves as external expression of internal character, courage, honor, loyalty, and clan membership, all visible in how you arrange and maintain your follicular crown. Baldness through age might be acceptable, but forced hair removal equals social death. Combat considerations influence hairstyling choices as warriors balance intimidation with practicality. You learn to keep hair out of your eyes during battles while maintaining the fierce appearance that psychological warfare demands. Braids and top knots serve dual purposes: practical vision and terrifying presentation that makes enemies question their life choices before combat begins. Trading expeditions spread Viking hair culture across medieval Europe, where lime-washed spikes and elaborate braids announce Scandinavian presence in foreign markets. You carry your heritage visibly through hairstyles that identify your origins, while commanding respect from merchants who understand that Vikings take their appearance as seriously as their weapons. Historians still argue whether Viking grooming practices reflected vanity or practical considerations, but you experience how hair becomes identity, honor, and heritage, combined into visible statements that separate true Norse warriors from everyone else who lacks the courage to weaponize their follicles. You navigate the treacherous marble corridors of imperial Rome, where your hairstyle declares political loyalty more clearly than campaign slogans, understanding that in a world where assassination lurks behind every column, your coiffure might be your most dangerous weapon. Roman society regulates everything from voting rights to dinner invitations through strict class hierarchies, and your hair serves as a walking advertisement of exactly where you belong in the empire's brutal pecking order. Early Republican Romans embrace conservatism that extends from politics to follicles. You keep your hair short, tidy, and rigorously practical as civic statements declaring, "I'm disciplined, I serve the state, I'm Roman." Anything longer suggests foreign corruption, feminine weakness, or dangerous laziness that threatens the republic's masculine virtue. Your clean-shaven face and modest haircut aren't fashion choices, but patriotic declarations of loyalty to traditional values. But imperial excess changes everything, as emperors like Nero and Commodus let their curls grow into flamboyant sculptures that mimic Greek philosophers or divine statues. You watch the imperial court embrace the Roman top knot, raised sections of carefully arranged hair that suggest intellect, youth, and refinement. These aren't accidents, but calculated public images where hair becomes propaganda for imperial ideology and personal ambition. Roman women face even higher stakes in the follicular political arena, where hairstyles become architectural achievements requiring slave labor, hot irons, and hours of daily maintenance. You struggle to construct the famous Flavian tower style, a literal mountain of curls and braids pinned impossibly above your head, knowing that the more elaborate your hairdo, the more clearly you advertise your wealth and leisure time to maintain such complexity. Imperial fashion cycles create dangerous political loyalty tests as empresses debut new styles in statues and official portraits that spread across the empire like imperial commands. You copy the current empress's coiffure not from flattery but survival, understanding that wearing outdated imperial hairstyles signals dangerous political allegiances to previous regimes that might have ended badly for everyone involved. The contrast between free and enslaved becomes visible through hair regulations that deny enslaved people this form of personal expression. You observe how forced short hair or plain arrangements strip away identity markers, while gladiators paradoxically wear dramatic hairstyles to build stage personas that blend athlete, celebrity, and existential threat in equal measure. Military requirements impose practical limitations that reinforce social hierarchies through functional hairstyling. You maintain regulation cuts that emphasize unity and discipline over individual expression, understanding that armies function through conformity rather than personal creativity. Soldiers sacrifice follicular freedom for imperial glory and steady wages. Class rebellion occasionally expresses itself through deliberately provocative hairstyles that challenge imperial authority through follicular insubordination. You witness some Romans growing long hair or adopting barbarian styles to show disdain for imperial values, transforming personal grooming into political statements that risk serious consequences from authorities who monitor appearance for signs of sedition. Court politics become particularly treacherous when imperial favorites fall from grace, taking their signature hairstyles down with them. You learn to read political winds through changing fashion trends, understanding that cutting your imperial-style hair can be either a bold statement of independence or a desperate attempt to distance yourself from fallen patrons. The empire's vast cultural diversity creates fascinating tensions between local traditions and Roman expectations. You navigate situations where provincial governors must balance respect for indigenous customs with imperial grooming standards, creating hybrid styles that satisfy both cultural identity and political necessity. Religious movements add another layer of complexity, as early Christians sometimes reject elaborate hairstyles for modest arrangements that signal spiritual rather than temporal priorities. You observe how religious conversion becomes visible through changed appearance that announces new loyalties, while potentially alienating traditional Roman social networks. Professional requirements create specialized grooming codes as senators, priests, and public officials adopt hairstyles appropriate to their offices. You understand that Roman careers depend partly on looking the part, where inappropriate hair choices can end political ambitions before they properly begin. Historians still argue whether Roman hair politics reflected genuine cultural values or pure imperial manipulation, but you experience how totalitarian societies control citizens through regulating the most intimate aspects of personal appearance, making even your morning grooming routine into political acts with potentially dangerous consequences. You feel the sacred weight of the Konmog atop your head as you kneel in morning meditation, understanding that this top knot represents far more than hairstyle. It embodies your soul's commitment to Bushido, the way of the warrior, where cutting your hair means spiritual death more terrifying than seppuku itself. The elaborate ritual of creating this distinctive samurai style begins before dawn, as you carefully shave the crown of your head and gather the remaining hair into a precise knot that declares your readiness to die with honor. The Chonmaj originally serves practical battlefield purposes when you don your kabuto helmet, keeping the shaved crown comfortable and secure during combat that might determine your lord's fate. You understand that every element of samurai appearance serves dual functions: practical efficiency and spiritual symbolism that transforms daily grooming into meditation on mortality, duty, and the fleeting nature of earthly existence. As peace settles over Japan during the Edo period, your top knot evolves from military necessity into rigid cultural identity marker that separates true warriors from common merchants and farmers. You maintain the style with religious devotion, knowing that its removal isn't just a haircut, but symbolic death that strips away everything that defines your existence as a member of the warrior class. The disgrace of losing your Chonmage carries consequences worse than physical death, because it destroys your honor while leaving you alive to contemplate the spiritual devastation. You witness disgraced samurai ordered to remove their top knots as punishment that transforms them into living ghosts, neither fully dead nor truly alive, existing in a liminal space where former identity becomes unreachable memory. The ritual of cutting the chonmage often precedes seppuku, the honorable suicide that allows warriors to atone for failures that have brought shame upon their families and lords. You understand that removing your top knot serves as final preparation for death, symbolically severing your connection to the material world before your wakizashi severs your connection to life itself. Japanese women during the Heian period display their own complex hair symbolism through styles like subarakashi, straight hair grown to extraordinary lengths that sometimes exceed their body height. You spend hours maintaining tresses that cascade like black silk waterfalls, understanding that such length requires immense care, time, and wealth, exclusive to aristocratic families who can afford this living display of feminine virtue. Later periods see women's hairstyles becoming increasingly ornate and stylized as the shimada and other coiled arrangements adorned with pins, combs, and decorations that communicate marital status, age, and social position. You navigate complex codes where specific styles indicate whether you're available for marriage, recently wed, or bearing children. Information encoded in follicular arrangements visible to anyone who understands the cultural grammar. Courtesans and geishas develop their own elaborate hairstyling traditions that serve both aesthetic and professional purposes. You learn to create dazzling arrangements that attract clients while signaling your training level and experience within the complex hierarchy of entertainment districts. Hair becomes advertising, artistry, and identity, simultaneously expressed through architectural arrangements defying gravity. The shogunate periodically passes laws restricting hairstyles based on social class, creating situations where violating follicular codes draws official punishment for exceeding your station. You carefully maintain styles appropriate to your rank, understanding that ambitious hair choices can result in suspicion, fines, or worse consequences for those who challenge social order through unauthorized grooming. Religious considerations add another dimension as Buddhist and Shinto traditions influence acceptable hairstyles for different occasions and life stages. You adapt your appearance according to spiritual requirements that sometimes conflict with social expectations, creating tensions between religious obligation and cultural conformity that require careful navigation. The Meiji Restoration brings dramatic changes as Western influence challenges traditional Japanese hair culture, forcing choices between ancestral customs and modernizing pressures. You watch as some samurai voluntarily abandon their topknots to embrace Western styles, while others cling to traditional arrangements despite changing political circumstances. Regional variations create subtle differences in hairstyling techniques and symbolic meanings that reflect local customs within broader Japanese cultural patterns. You learn to recognize geographic origins through minor styling variations that inform social interactions and business relationships. Historians still argue whether Japanese hair traditions reflected genuine spiritual beliefs or social control mechanisms, but you experience how deeply personal appearance becomes intertwined with concepts of honor, duty, and identity that define your entire worldview and social existence. You sit beneath the African sun while skilled hands weave intricate cornrows into your scalp, understanding that each braid carries more than aesthetic beauty. These patterns preserve escape routes your ancestors encoded during the brutal centuries of the transatlantic slave trade, turning hairstyles into silent maps of resistance and survival. The geometric designs flowing across your head speak a language older than written words, communicating heritage, status, and hope through follicular artistry that colonialism could never fully erase. Ancient African civilizations develop hair traditions that transform personal grooming into cultural storytelling, long before European contact disrupts these sophisticated systems. You witness Nubian queens like Amanirenas and Amanitore, wearing complex braided wigs and headpieces that rival Egyptian royalty, asserting their power through follicular crowns that declare divine authority and cultural sophistication to anyone questioning their legitimacy. In what becomes Nigeria, Yoruba and Igbo peoples treat hair as artistic medium, where master stylists enjoy priest-like status within their communities. You entrust your scalp to craftspeople who plan intricate patterns reserved for specific life stages. Certain designs for brides preparing for marriage, others for warriors departing on campaigns, still others for spiritual initiates receiving sacred knowledge from elders who guard ancient wisdom. Among the Himba people of Namibia, red ochre paste made from powdered stone and butterfat coats elaborate braids that signify everything from puberty to marital status, according to seasonal rhythms that connect personal identity to natural cycles. You feel the weight of clay and tradition as each application transforms your hair into living sculpture that proclaims your place within community structures older than written history. The systematic horror of slavery transforms these cultural practices into survival strategies, as enslaved Africans use hairstyles to preserve ancestral memories while encoding practical information needed for resistance and escape. You learn that certain cornrow patterns symbolize escape routes, others indicate safe meeting points, and still others preserve ancestral styles from homeland regions, defying erasure through every twist and braid. Rice seeds hidden within braided hair provide both sustenance and agricultural knowledge for enslaved people who understand that survival depends on preserving food sources and farming techniques from African homelands. You discover how hair becomes a smuggling system that transfers both calories and cultivation wisdom across the Middle Passage into plantation slavery, where such knowledge means survival versus starvation. West African spiritual traditions invest hair with sacred significance that survives despite Christian conversion pressures, as braided patterns continue carrying religious symbolism and ancestral connections that slave owners cannot detect or suppress. You participate in styling rituals that honor deities and ancestors through follicular offerings that maintain spiritual continuity despite physical displacement and cultural assault. Colonial authorities throughout Africa attempt to control indigenous populations, partly through regulating traditional hairstyles that represent cultural identity and resistance to European domination. You witness how forcing adoption of European grooming standards becomes part of broader campaigns to destroy African cultural confidence and replace indigenous values with colonial submission. The recovery and celebration of African hair traditions becomes part of modern liberation movements as people reclaim braiding techniques, natural textures, and symbolic patterns that connect contemporary identity to ancestral heritage. You understand how the phrase, "black is beautiful," encompasses follicular pride that challenges centuries of imposed European beauty standards designed to create cultural inferiority complexes. Modern scholarship reveals the sophisticated chemistry and engineering behind traditional African hair care, including natural oils, protective styling techniques, and sustainable practices that preserve hair health in challenging climates. You marvel at indigenous knowledge systems that modern cosmetic science struggles to replicate through synthetic products and industrial processes. The global influence of African hairstyling spreads through cultural exchange, migration, and appreciation for techniques that prioritize hair health while creating stunning visual effects. You observe how braiding patterns developed in ancient Africa now influence international fashion, while carrying forward cultural memories encoded in every strand. Legal battles over hair discrimination in contemporary societies reflect ongoing struggles for cultural acceptance and professional equality that extend centuries-old conflicts between African identity and European-dominated institutional requirements. You understand how workplace hair policies become modern battlegrounds for cultural recognition and civil rights. Historians still argue whether hair traditions represent purely aesthetic choices or encode deeper spiritual and political meanings. But you experience how African hair culture transforms personal grooming into cultural preservation, artistic expression, and quiet revolution that survives every attempt at suppression through the simple act of braiding hope into tomorrow. You stand at the crossroads of ancient civilizations where hair becomes humanity's most subtle weapon against oppression, understanding that when voices are silenced and swords are forbidden, the scalp transforms into a canvas of resistance that shouts defiance louder than any revolution. Across continents and centuries, you witness how conquered peoples, religious minorities, and cultural outcasts weaponize their follicles against empires that seek to erase their identities through forced assimilation and systematic cultural destruction. In Roman-occupied Judea, Jewish men refused to adopt elaborate Roman grooming fashions, preserving beards and traditional hairstyles rooted in religious law that declares hair sacred and untouchable. You observe how maintaining ancestral appearance becomes quiet protest against imperial pressure to assimilate, where every uncut beard represents theological resistance and cultural survival in the face of overwhelming political power determined to create uniform Roman subjects. Celtic warriors in ancient Gaul transformed their lime-washed hair into psychological warfare against Julius Caesar's legions, creating mohawk-like crests that serve as both intimidation and cultural preservation. You watch Gallic tribes spike their hair into terrifying formations that announce, "We are not you, we will not become you, and we will fight to preserve what makes us different," through follicular battle standards that terrify Roman soldiers. The Parthians and later Sassanids counter Roman cultural imperialism through distinctive royal hairstyles, featuring long curls and elaborate beards that symbolize divine authority rooted in Persian rather than Mediterranean traditions. You witness how their rulers deliberately maintain appearance that looks exotic and effeminate to Roman eyes, while proclaiming ancestral legitimacy and cultural superiority that refuses Roman definitions of civilized grooming. Enslaved populations throughout ancient empires use hair as silent communication network when other forms of expression face deadly consequences. You discover how braiding patterns conceal maps, seeds, and secret messages, while preserving cultural memories that slave owners cannot detect or destroy. Hair becomes the ultimate hiding place for rebellion planning and heritage preservation when survival depends on appearing compliant. Women across ancient societies rebel through follicular choices that challenge gender expectations and social control mechanisms designed to regulate feminine behavior. You observe Spartan women wearing short hair in contrast to other Greek women's long locks, expressing independence and physical readiness that defies conventional feminine ideals. Roman women occasionally reject imperial fashion trends to align with philosophical movements like Stoicism or early Christianity. When emperors fall, their signature hairstyles become dangerous political statements that must be abandoned immediately by anyone hoping to survive regime changes. You learn to read political winds through changing hair fashions, understanding that cutting imperial-style hair can signal either courageous independence or desperate attempts to distance yourself from fallen leaders whose followers often face execution. Religious persecution creates situations where maintaining traditional hairstyles becomes martyrdom that costs lives while preserving faith. You witness early Christians rejecting elaborate pagan styling for modest arrangements that announce spiritual priorities, often facing social ostracism and economic consequences for refusing to conform to dominant cultural expectations about appropriate appearance. Colonial powers throughout history attempt to control indigenous populations, partly through forced adoption of European grooming standards designed to destroy cultural confidence and create psychological submission. You understand how residential schools, missionary programs, and administrative policies target traditional hairstyles as symbols of primitive culture that must be eliminated for successful civilization projects. The cutting of Native American children's braids in boarding schools represents cultural genocide enacted through hairdressing, where forced assimilation begins with destroying visible markers of tribal identity and spiritual connection. You feel the trauma of communities whose children return home looking like strangers, their follicular heritage severed along with their cultural memories and linguistic abilities. Modern movements reclaiming traditional hairstyles become acts of cultural resurrection that challenge centuries of imposed beauty standards and professional discrimination. You participate in global recognition that hair choices represent fundamental human rights to cultural expression, religious practice, and personal identity that transcend employment requirements and social conformity pressures. Contemporary legal battles over hair discrimination reveal how ancient conflicts between cultural identity and institutional control continue shaping modern societies, where natural textures, religious coverings, and traditional styles still face systematic exclusion from educational and professional opportunities. You understand that throughout human history, hair has served as humanity's most democratic form of resistance, available to the powerless and invisible to oppressors, until the moment of revelation, when accumulated follicular defiance transforms individual choices into collective movements that reshape entire civilizations through the simple revolutionary act of refusing to cut what grows naturally from your own scalp. The soft whisper of ancient voices fades now, carried away on the gentle breeze of time that has witnessed every human story worth telling. You've traveled through millennia where ordinary people discovered extraordinary ways to alter consciousness, command seas, build empires, and express identity through the simple act of arranging what grows from their heads. These weren't distant legends, but fellow human beings who faced the same fundamental challenges of existence: finding meaning, asserting identity, and preserving dignity in the face of overwhelming forces beyond their control. As you settle deeper into comfort, let these stories remind you that every generation has found creative ways to transcend their circumstances, whether through medieval herbs that offered escape from feudal misery, naval innovations that connected distant shores, leadership that unified diverse peoples through tolerance rather than force, or personal choices that preserved cultural memory against impossible odds. The ingenuity, courage, and resilience echoing through these tales flows through your own veins, connecting you to an unbroken chain of human creativity that stretches from the first conscious thought to whatever dreams await your sleeping mind tonight. Rest now in the knowledge that you belong to a species capable of transforming poison into medicine, waves into highways, conquest into liberation, and simple hair into statements of profound meaning. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges and opportunities, but tonight you can sleep peacefully, knowing that human beings have always found ways to thrive, create beauty, and preserve what matters most. Sweet dreams carry the wisdom of ages, and may you wake refreshed and inspired by the endless possibilities that await when ordinary people decide to do extraordinary things.